Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we are unpacking an absolutely epic, literally Game of Thrones style saga that played out right on the African savanna. We're talking about the legendary shifting thrones of the Sabi Sand lion coalitions. But, this isn't just a story about raw power and savage battles. It's a story that is fundamentally grounded in science. We are going to explore exactly how field researchers use physical descriptions and visual identifiers to track these massive animal kingdoms, and we'll specifically be focusing on the infamous Mapogo and the highly strategic Majingilan dynasties. But before we meet our main characters, we really have to ask ourselves a basic question. How do we actually know all of this? How do scientists read the chaotic, vast battlefield of the African savanna to track these legendary kings over decades? It's not like these lions are walking around with name tags out there. So let's get into our first section, reading the savanna's kings. Okay, let's dive right into this. To understand the history of these massive coalitions, we first need a kind of decoder ring for lion biology. Back in 1979, researchers Dr. Craig Packer and Ann Pusey began this absolutely monumental study in Tanzania. To track lions over multiple generations, they developed a really rigorous visual ID system. They essentially created field ID cards for every single lion. They mapped whisker spot patterns, documented specific ear notches, tracked physical battle scars, and heavily analyzed mane morphology. This exact scientific method is what allows rangers and scientists in reserves, like the Sabi Sand, to monitor individual lions from birth to death. It literally turns wild animals into documented historical figures. And this brilliantly illustrates the real science behind the mane. Dr. Packer and Peyton West conducted this fascinating research using life-size dummy lions paired with the sounds of hyenas feeding. And what they found was just incredible. A long, dark mane is basically a biological billboard. It correlates directly with high testosterone, robust immune responses, and extreme battle readiness. Rival males actually avoided the dark-maned dummies 90% of the time. And females, they actively chose the darkest-maned real lions in 13 out of 14 observed cases. That is huge. But, it does come with an adaptive cost: severe heat absorption. A dark-maned lion has to be incredibly tough just to survive wearing a heavy, black fur coat in the blistering African sun. All right, moving right along to the rise of the Mapogo 6. Now that we know how to identify these kings and what their physical traits actually mean, let's meet the absolute most infamous lion dynasty in recent history. To understand the Mapogos, we first have to understand what a coalition is. It's a cooperative alliance of male lions that join forces to dominate territories. Usually this is just 2, maybe 3 or 4 brothers. A mega pride coalition of 6 males, however, that is an incredibly rare, hyper-powered anomaly, and it gave them an almost unfair, practically unstoppable advantage. Now, notice how perfectly these brothers apply the visual tracking science we just learned about. The Mapogo 6 were all highly distinct from one another. Makolu was the oldest, kind of an outsider who joined the Sparta Pride, and he was known for his massive dark mane and just his sheer large size. Then there's Mr. T, also known as Satan, who had this very unique mohawk mane and was intensely aggressive. Kinky Tail, well, he had a literal kink in his tail. Skew Spine had a really deep scar on his back. Dreadlocks had this matted hair caught right in his mane, and Pretty Boy was the strategic one. He avoided unnecessary fights, which left him with way fewer battle scars. These physical markers were exactly how researchers documented their truly terrifying rise to power. And when I say terrifying rise, I really mean it. They conquered a staggering 170,000 acres of the Sabi Sand region. To put that into perspective, that is a massive, totally unprecedented footprint for a single coalition to dominate. Their takeover was just absolute brutality. Usually, lions enter a new territory quietly, right? Not the Mapogos. They literally roared their way in, actively hunting down their competition. They wiped out over 100 rival lions. And yes, that includes cubs and females, all to successfully control 8 different prides. They were so large and so powerful, they even specialized in hunting adult buffalo, giraffes, and young rhinos. They completely shifted the entire ecosystem through sheer, unmatched aggression. Next up, let's look at a brutal reign and fall. But as you can probably guess, a throne built on pure violence is rarely stable. The exact same aggression that allowed the Mapogos to conquer the Sabi Sand eventually tore them apart right from the inside. Looking at their timeline here, Makulu joined the brothers in 2000. By 2006, they had totally conquered the territory. But by 2008, internal rivalries, particularly between the hyper-aggressive Mr. T and the older Makulu, caused the coalition to actually physically split into 2 factions. This division, it was their fatal flaw. By 2010, Kinky Tail was killed by an incoming rival coalition called the Lionesses. And by 2012, the infamous Mr. T was ultimately defeated by the Salati pride males. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is the contrast in their survival strategies. Just look at Makulu versus Mr. T. Makulu, the dark-maned giant, was actually highly strategic. He used selective aggression, only fighting when he really needed to, and incredibly, he survived to be nearly 15 years old. That is well past the average 8 to 10-year lifespan of a male lion. Mr. T, on the other hand, with his distinctive mohawk, was pure chaos. I mean, he even cannibalized his own brother's cubs just to assert dominance. His hyperaggression led directly to a violent death in battle. Survival on the savannah isn't just about raw strength, it's heavily about strategy.
Which brings us to our next chapter. The Majangalain dynasty takes over.
So with the Mapogos fractured and defeated, a massive power void was left in the Sabi Sand ecosystem. Enter the next succession of power. The incoming Majangalain coalition was a stark contrast to their predecessors. Where the Mapogos were 6 males defined by chaotic internal rivalry and the destruction of the local population, the Majangalains were 4 to 5 males defined by extreme internal cohesion. They shared food resources, they shared mating rights, and they fought tactically as an organized unit. This minimized their internal energy waste and created a highly stable territory. It was a complete game changer.
Visually, researchers tracked them through their own unique physical markers. You had the dark-maned Majingalan, who acted as the ultimate leader, and the scar-nosed Majingalan. Because they ruled with stability rather than pure chaos, they successfully protected the Tasalala pride bloodline. And ironically, that bloodline actually carried Mapogo genetics. They also fostered the incredibly successful Mahogany pride. Ultimately, the Majingalane reign led to a massive genetic revitalization in the area.
And finally, let's wrap up with science, survival, and conservation. So why does tracking all of this actually matter? I mean, it's thrilling history, sure, but this meticulous visual and genetic tracking serves a truly critical, real-world purpose for the survival of the species. Using the decades of data gathered by visually tracking these lions, Dr. Packer's team developed a computer program called SimSimba. They definitively proved that to protect lion populations from completely collapsing due to the frequent turnover of coalitions, hunting must be strictly restricted to males over 6 years old. This single piece of data derived straight from tracking these specific lions is literally official government policy in several African nations today.
Furthermore, by visually tracking mane colors, counting coalition sizes, and testing genetics, researchers can actively monitor the health of entirely isolated ecosystems. Large, stable coalitions like the Majingalains, they indicate a healthy, prey-rich environment. Conversely, genetic tracking in places like the Ngorongoro crater showed that isolated lions were suffering from severe inbreeding and vulnerability to diseases like canine distemper. The lions are, quite literally, a living bioindicator of the entire region's health.
Which leaves us with a pretty vital question to consider. We know how to read the physical signs now, right? The manes, the scars, the coalition sizes. But as human boundaries increasingly close in on these isolated reserves, restricting natural migration, how will these shifting thrones survive? What does the dramatic rise and fall of the Mapogos and Majangalains actually tell us about the intensive management we're going to need to protect the genetic diversity and the future of these legendary animal kingdoms? Just something to think about the next time you see a photo of a dark-maned king out on the savannah. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.